Hi! The Arabian Nights, read by Sanjiv. Hello! Today we are going to read the story of the Arabian Nights. A time of unhappiness prevailed in the country when night after night, Shahryar, the Sultan, would marry a girl and kill her the very next morning. People lived in fear. Soon it became difficult for the vizier to find new wives. Seeing him worried, Shahrazad, the intelligent daughter of the vizier, requested him to get her married to the sultan. Vizier was horrified, but Shahrazad assured him that she had a plan which would put an end to all these killings. In the end, Vizier got her married to the sultan. She requested the sultan to allow her to take her younger sister with her. At night, according to the plan, the younger sisters woke her up and begged her to tell a story, for she could not sleep. Shahrazad began to tell, while the sister and sultan listened to her. The first story that Shahrazad was going to tell was Sindbad the Sailor, about the first voyage. Long ago, when Harun al-Rashid was the ruler of Baghdad, there lived a poor man named Hindbad who earned his livelihood by carrying other people's goods from place to place as a porter. Generally, he was content with this job, but there were occasions when he used to grumble. Once, when tired out by the weight he was carrying, he sat down to rest outside the house of a very rich man named Sindbad. There, he heard some soft music and smelt a rare fragrance coming from inside. He felt very sad at the difference between his fate and that of the man whose name was so much like his own. "Why am I poor and he so rich?" Hindbad said loudly. "Am I not as a good man as he is?" Sindbad heard these words from inside and called for the speaker. Hindbad was brought into the splendid hall where Sindbad was feasting with his friends. He gave Hindbad a seat right next to himself and asked him to have a meal with them. After finishing the meal, Sindbad asked, "Tell me, why are you grumbling at your fate?" "Pardon me, my lord, I was weary and sad," he replied. "Don't fear," said Sindbad kindly. "I do not blame you for your words, but listen how hard I worked to earn my riches I now enjoy. Listen to the story of my life." With that, Sindbad started his story. "I was a young man when my father died. He left behind a very large fortune, nearly all of which I spent in enjoyment. Then I thought I had to do something with little money left with me. So I bought some goods and sailed for the Persian Gulf, hoping to make some profit there. The ship halted at many small islands and we did business. One day, as our ship could not move further due to the lack of wind for sailing, we saw a little green patch peeping above water. Some of us rowed to it and some wood for fire and food to hold a feast there. We were all having a feast there when we found that the green patch on which we were feasting was nothing but the back of a huge sea monster. The creature shook its body and lashed its tail, and everyone was either into a boat or into the sea. Soon, all except me were safely aboard the ship, and it sailed away, leaving me on the monster's back. The huge creature dived into the water. I should have gone too, but seizing a large piece of wood, I kept myself afloat. All day and night, I kept tossing on the waves. At last, I was thrown on the shore of a real island. I felt hot and hungry, so I dragged myself to the middle of the island where I found a few herbs. I ate them and drank some cool water from a clean and clear spring. I felt better. Wishing to see the place, I walked on until I met a man who took me to a cave in which there were many other men. They were the servants of the ruler of the island who were present there to fetch his horses back to the palace. It was lucky for me I have met them that day. I could have never found the way to the other side of the island on my own. These people were kind. They gave me food to eat and took me with them when they set out on their journey and presented me before the king. He listened to my story and offered me to stay with him as long as I wished to. The chief city where I made my home was built on the seashore. I spent a great deal of time watching ships and talking to the merchants. I paid a daily visit to the king and had also grown friendly with some of the residents. They were Indians and very wise indeed. One day, the very ship in which I had sailed out from Basra came into the harbor. It still had all those bundles of goods which I had bought and on which my name was clearly written. When I asked for my goods, the sailor looked at me in surprise. "How can you be Sindbad?" he asked, "when I myself saw him drown?" "I believe you are lying to get these goods." When several other sailors spoke for my being Sindbad indeed, he let me have the goods at last. I looked through the bundle, carried the very best to the king, and asked him to accept the same as a gift. He took my costly present with great pleasure and gave me one worth far more in return. I then sold or exchanged the rest of my goods, bade goodbye to His Majesty, set sail for Basora, taking with me the articles made on the island. These I sold for a large sum of money. On finishing the story of his first voyage, Sindbad ordered the band to play again. As the poor man enjoyed himself greatly, the rich man gave him a purse full of money and asked him to come the next day to listen to more of his stories. Sindbad was delighted at his good fortune. The next day, Sindbad was telling Hindbad the second voyage. I was living quietly on the money gained by my first voyage. Soon I got tired and set out to sell the large number of useful items that I had bought, said Sindbad when he and his poor guest were once more seated together. One day we reached a deserted island. There were fruit trees and flowers and meadows, and running streams which looked so tempting that we wanted to stroll in the pleasant-looking fields. I went alone and took some food and wine, found a nice shady spot beside a stream, had a good meal, and then fell fast asleep. When I got up, I found that all others had sailed away without me. I blamed myself again and again for my folly, but ultimately I climbed a high tree in order to get a good view of the island. Far away, I saw something white and ran to it with all speed. It was a very large and smooth, curious thing, rounded like a dome. As I was staring at it, it grew dark all around. It was late in the day, but the sky seemed to be hidden all at once by a thick cloud. Surprisingly, the thick cloud was really just a huge bird, bigger than any I could have imagined in the wildest of my dreams. I thought it could be a wonderful rock of which the sailors used to talk about, and that great white dome must be its egg. I crept under the egg, and as the bird sat on it, I tied myself to one of her big, strong legs. As the bird flew, it carried me so swiftly that I felt dizzy and lost my senses. When I found myself on the ground, I made haste to free myself. I was lucky, for almost the next moment she caught a huge serpent in her bill and flew away. This new place seemed a very strange one. Suddenly, I forgot my trouble for the ground, and I was standing on what was covered with big and shining diamonds. But still, there were other things that filled my heart with fear. These were serpents, larger than I had ever seen in my own land. These serpents hid away in their homes during the day, but at night they were all around. I looked about for some place in which it might be possible to take shelter till day dawned. At length, I found a cave. The entrance of it was so small that I could block it with a large stone. Though now feeling safer, I could by no means of sleep. Serpents hissing were too fearful. At dawn, I left the cave, walked around the valley, felt miserable to touch the diamonds under my feet. The food I had with me was still there, but I was so weary that I lay down and slept. I was startled by a sharp sound. It was the sound of a large piece of raw meat falling nearby. Another piece fell, and another, and several more. And as they fell heavily upon the diamonds, the lovely shining stones stuck firmly into them. I knew by the sailors' stories that the meat was being thrown by men on the mountains, in the hope that it would be fetched back by the eagles to feed their young ones in their nests from where the diamonds would be taken away. Now, I thought of an easy way of escaping by tying a piece of meat firmly onto my back and waiting till an eagle carried me up out of the dreadful valley. This I did, but not until I had filled my bag with the precious stones. One of the eagles picked me up and bore me to its nest on the top of the mountains, where a merchant was frightening away the eagle. He found me. At first, he looked at me in surprise and then said I had no right to steal his diamonds. "If you will listen to me," I said gently, "you will find I am no thief, though I have enough diamonds to make both of us rich for life. I have the very best of them." Other merchants now crowded around, and all showed great surprise at my story and wondered still more when I showed them the stones. I was then taken to the house of the merchant who had found me. I told my strange story again to his wife and children and begged him to take some of the stones, but he only took the smallest of them. Thereafter, on reaching my home once again, I settled down to a life of ease. I even shared my riches with my poor neighbors, thus gladdening their hearts. After finishing with his second story, Sinbad gave Hindbad another purse full of money and asked him to return the next day. Hindbad returned the next day to hear Sinbad's third voyage. Next day, when Hindbad came, Sinbad, after having his food, started the story of his third voyage. Hardly had I started on my third voyage when a very great storm arose. The captain of the ship told us that the ship was being driven towards an island inhabited by savages who were not more than 2 feet high and had hairs all over their body. They were very fierce, and we should not make them angry. As our ship reached the land, a swarm of them swam out, dragged it ashore, made all of us get out, and then took the ship away with them to another island. We walked on till we reached a beautiful palace. Passing through the courtyard, we came into a room where we saw a heap of men's bones and a large number of long steel skewers to roast meat. Suddenly, a terrible ogre came into with a loud noise. He had one huge eye, that too in the very middle of the forehead. His mouth was like that of a horse, and his ears flapped down on his shoulders like an elephant. He was as tall as a high tree. One glimpse of him made all of us nearly die with fright. After a good look at all of us, he took me up by my neck. On seeing my lean and thin body, he threw me down and took the captain of the ship, fattest of all of us, stuck a skewer through his body, roasted and ate him up. After this, he went to sleep, to get up the next day, roast and eat another of our crew. At last, 10 of us were left. One day, we made a plan. Each one took a skewer, and making its point red hot, we stuck them together into the one eye of our massive and terrible enemy. Mad with pain, he tried to seize us, but we got out of the way and ran to the shore. There we made some rafts, but had not got afloat when 2 giants came in sight, leading the terrible ogre, who we had hoped was dead. Jumping onto the rafts, we pushed off from the shore, but the giants, wading into the water as far as they dared, threw huge stones after us. Some rafts sank, but the one on which I stood with 2 other men was saved. Happily beating about on the sea for many hours, we came to another island, where we got some very good fruit. Being tired out, we lay down to sleep, but were soon awakened by a rustling sound, which to our horror we found was made by a huge serpent. But before we get away, the creature swallowed one of my comrades and then went back to his den. Next night, he came back and caught the second comrade. All night I lay along one of the boughs, afraid to sleep lest the cruel monster should come back. As soon as the day broke, I slid down, gathered all the brushwood near, and making into bundles, placed some of them round the tree. The others I tied to the topmost branches. When the sky began to darken, I lit them, and he feared to cross my ring of fire. In the morning, feeling very miserable, I made up my mind to drown myself, but on reaching the shore, I saw some distance off a ship passing by. Unrolling my turban, I waved it aloft, shouting loudly all the while, until the captain sent a boat to fetch me to the ship. Good fortune was again waiting for me, for this was the very captain who had sailed away without me on my second voyage. As soon as he learned who I was, he told me how glad he was to have been able to make up for that fault, by saving me from now what might have proved a worse mistake. The captain returned my goods to me, and I sold them at a fair price and returned to Basora with a huge sum of money. From Basra, I went to Baghdad and bought another fine house with the grounds all around it. As always, I shared my profits with poor and decided to settle down now. But this was quite difficult for me, as I went to the sea for the 4th time. Hindbad went home that night with a glad heart, for he was no longer poor. His rich friend had again given him a purse full of money. Hindbad was again at Sinbad's place at dinner time to hear the 4th voyage. As soon as the dinner was over, Sinbad began the story of his 4th voyage. He said, I traveled through a great part of Persia, also known as Iran, buying and selling. At last, after reaching the coast, I went aboard a ship to sail. But a storm was again waiting for me. In this storm, the sails of my ship were torn into shreds, the ship blown upon the land, and many of the passengers and sailors drowned. With a few of the others, I clung to a plank, which was washed ashore on an island, where we found fruit and water freely. The next morning, we set out to explore the island, but before we could go far off, we were caught by some black men who carried us to their homes. They seemed very kind and gave us a tasty herb to eat. Though hungry, I ate none of this herb, fearing it might do some harm. In this I was wise, for I was the lone person to be in full senses. Others ate freely the herb that was given to them, making them very fat. Then the blacks killed them and ate them up. The dreadful atmosphere, along with the little food, made me a lean and thin person. As a result, the blacks were not able to take notice of my movements, and thus I got a chance to move here and there without being caught. One day, when everybody else except me and an old man were out, I walked slowly till some distance away from the village, when I set off running as fast as I could, paying no heed to the old man's cries. Resting a while now and then, I hurried on until night came. I couldn't meet anyone for 7 days. On the 8th day, I had the good fortune to come upon some white men gathering pepper, which was plentiful on the island. On hearing my story, they seemed very surprised that I got away with my life. They treated me with much kindness and took me to their own island, where the king gave me some new clothes and bade his people take good care of me. I became a great favorite with them all. I started to think about some way to pay back a little for their kindness. Seeing that all of them, including the king, rode upon the bare backs of their horse, I planned to make a saddle, bridle, and stirrups for them. I gave the first set of it to the king. He rewarded me heavily. Soon, I took it as a business, and many costly presents were given to me by those for whom I made saddles, and within no time, I was a rich man again. The king thought that I should stay in his country as a token of love, gave me a wife. Initially, I was pleased enough to stay, but later on, I began to long for my land, Baghdad. Therefore, keeping my eyes open, I waited for my chance to escape. My chance came, but in a peculiar manner, my wife fell sick and died. Then, according to the custom of the country, I was buried with her in a deep pit, on the side of a mountain near the sea. My coffin was an open one, and when the king and his men left, I rose up. The pit was like a long cave full of dead bodies. I felt frightened and wished I had died in one of the storms at the sea. I took some of the bread and water placed in the coffin. I groped about to find some outlet but failed to do so. My food was all gone, when one day the mouth of the cave was uncovered and I saw another burial taking place. The dead body was of a man, and his wife was buried with him. The usual 7 loaves of bread and a pitcher of water was placed in the coffin. The poor woman soon died, so I took the bread and water, which lasted several days. One morning, I followed a strange sound and found myself on the seashore. The sound proved to be the heavy breathing of some creature that had come into the cave to feed upon the dead bodies. When I was sure of the way out of the cave, I crawled back into my living tomb to fetch the precious stones and jewels and my bread and water to help me live until I found some help to sail back. I made several neat bundles of the items and then waited for some passing ship to pick me up. On 3rd day, a vessel sailed out from the harbor, and I shouted loudly, alongside waving my turban. Luckily, the sailors noticed me. A boat came from the ship and rowed me to it. When they asked about my situation, I told them that I had been shipwrecked, but luckily landed with a portion of my goods. They somehow didn't take notice of my stupid story. I made another large fortune by the sale of the articles bought from the cave, and at length I reached my home safely. As usual, I shared my fortune with the poor and the needy. Here, Sinbad wished his guests good night inviting them all for dinner with him the next day. And then he handed Sinbad the usual purse of 100 coins. The poor man once again went back happily. Hindbad once again returned to Sinbad to hear the fifth voyage. Once again, after staying happily at my home, I forgot all the ill happenings of my past voyages and longed for yet another, told Sinbad. I had bought many costly items with me to trade and then sent them to the port, where I was having my own ship being built. We all set out hoping to do good business. But as luck would have it, one day we landed on a desert island where we found a young rock just ready to break from its shell. My fellow merchants roasted it and ate it up. Just as my comrades had finished their meals, for I by no means wished to join in it. We saw the parent birds coming. The captain, fearing the anger of the great creatures, which looked like two large clouds floating in the sky, hurried us aboard and sailed away with all speed. When the birds found out the situation, they swept down with a loud noise, took up 2 huge stones, and flew after us. They came just over our vessels and dropped the stones. One of them fell on our ship, smashing it into pieces. Many of my fellow merchants died on the spot. A few of us fell into the water and sank. When I came up to the surface, I caught hold of a plank with one of my hands and swam. In the morning, I saw a little old man making signs to me to carry him on the back over the brook. Taking pity on his age and condition, I did so, but when I would have pulled him down on the other side, he twisted his legs around my neck so tightly that I fell on the ground half choked. Even after seeing my condition, he made some signs for getting off, but opening his legs a little to let me breathe better. Piercing his feet into my stomach, he ordered me to rise up and carry him further. Days and nights passed, but he showed no intentions to get off, until my good luck helped me and I got rid of him in the following way. Coming to a spot where a few days before I had left the juice of some grapes in the calabash, I drank the juice, which by the passing of time had become a very good wine. This gave me fresh strength, and instead of dragging myself wearily along, I danced and sang merrily. The old man, seeing how light-hearted the wine had made me, signed me to give him some. He took a deep drink and soon became so merry that he lost his hold on my shoulders. When I tossed him off and killed him with a big stone, lest he should make me his victim once more. Some sailors, whom I met shortly afterwards, their ship having put in the island for water, said I was the first person they had ever known to escape from the old man of the sea. One of the new hands on board, taking pity on my condition, gave me a large bag and advised me to go pick coconuts with some other merchants. Keeping close to the party, I reached the place where coconuts grew. The trees were so tall that I wondered how we would get the nuts. There were so many monkeys on the branches of the trees. The men, picking up some stones, threw them at the monkey. The monkey, in return, pelted us with coconuts, throwing them down so quickly that soon our bags were loaded. The same thing happened for quite a few days until we had enough to fill the ship, which had waited for us in the harbor. Then, bidding the friendly merchant goodbye, I went aboard and in due time reached Baghdad. I changed my coconuts for pearls and spices and grew rich. Giving Hindbad 100 sequins, Sinbad wished him goodbye, asking him to return the next day to listen to the story of his 6th voyage. Hindbad returned the next day. Taking up his story where he had left off the day before, Sinbad began again. Traveling through Persia and the Indies, I at length took passage on a vessel bound on a long voyage. After many days at sea, the captain and the pilot lost their way. The captain found his ship had got into the most dangerous current. The ropes broke, sails got torn, and the vessel was carried ashore and wrecked. "We may as well set about digging our graves," said he, "for no one ever escapes from this terrible place." Bones of those who had already died there were scattered all over the place, along with goods and wreckage. For some days we wandered about, ignoring the precious stones under our feet, thinking only of our sad fate. The most careful of us ate only a little of our share of food each day, so that some lived longer than the rest. But at last I was the only one left, and with a very heavy heart I began to dig my grave, fully believing that there was no hope. Yet God again was pleased with me. As I stood lonely and miserable, looking upon the currents that had brought our ruin, an idea came into my head. With all my efforts, I made a raft with the pieces of timber on the shore, loaded it with precious stones and costly stuff lying here and there, and stepped aboard, trusting that the stream would carry me to some place where men lived, and so give me a chance to survive. If I lost my life, I should be no worse off than in staying on the coast to die. With 2 small oars, I guided the raft, leaving it to be carried by the current. I entered a dark tunnel. Several days passed, and still the raft floated through the long dark tunnel. I had finished my food. Feeling weak and starved, I sank down in a state of drowsiness, but awoke up to find myself once more in the light, surrounded by a number of black men. Full of joy at my good fortune, I arose and gave thanks aloud to God, who had brought me to a place of safety. One of the blacks, understanding my words, stepped forward and asked how I was able to reach their country. They had seen my raft floating in the river, he said, and had tied it to the bank till I should wake up. After eating a little food, I told them of my strange adventures. The man who had first spoken to me told the others what I said. He was the only one who understood my speech. They wondered at me, and placing me on horseback, took me straight to the king. Amused by my story, the king ordered it to be written down in letters of gold and kept with the important papers of that kingdom. I was very surprised by the sight of my raft and my belongings, which the natives had taken care to bring with them. The king was very amazed by my treasures and thought of them and the emeralds to be very rare and beautiful. Seeing this, I begged him to accept all my goods, as a token of my thankfulness to him and his people. By this, he would by no means to do. He said that instead of taking my riches, he meant to add to them. And I was placed in the care of his chief men, who treated me with great kindness. Though time passed pleasantly, I longed to return to my home. Going therefore to pay my daily visit to the king, I told him of my wish, and begged that he would let me return to Baghdad. He agreed at once, and giving me my valuable gifts, asked if I would carry a message of friendship to the Caliph Harun al-Rashid, together with a costly present and a letter written upon a skin of great value. I agreed. On reaching Baghdad, I set out to fulfill my promise to the king. His gift to the king was made up of 4 things: a beautiful cup cut out of a large ruby and filled with pearls, the skin of a serpent supposed to keep anyone who lay upon it from becoming ill, a large quantity of wood of aloes and of camphor, and a beautiful slave whose clothing was rich with jewels. The caliph, astonished at the richness of the gift, could not resist asking many questions about the king. After telling him all he wanted to know, I was free to return home and to settle down again, this time, as I thought, for good. When the story finished, Hindbad went away taking with him the purse of gold sequins, but the next day he returned to dine with Sinbad, who after the meal told the story of his 7th and last voyage. Hindbad returned the next day and Sinbad had started telling the next story. One day, I was enjoying myself with some friends when a slave from the palace came with a message that I should go to the Caliph at once. His Highness, having written a reply to the letter from the King of Indies, wished me to carry it to him, together with a suitable present. Although it was a pleasure to serve my king, I did not wish to face the dangers of the sea and told him of all the misery through which I had passed. In spite of being sorry for all that, he asked me to bear his letter and gift to the King of the Indies. Seeing that he would not change his mind, I agreed to go. After a fair and pleasant journey, arrived at the king's court. The gift was a very costly one. The king took great pleasure in accepting it. After a short stay at the island, I begged to depart. I went on board the vessel, taking with me a splendid gift, hoping to have a speedy and pleasant voyage. We had been at sea. For about 3 days, the ship was attacked by pirates. I was taken with several others and sold as a slave. The rich merchant who bought me treated me well, and finding I was able to shoot with a bow, he took me out with him to shoot elephants, of which there were many in the forest. Having told me to climb the tree and wait for the animals to pass by, he gave me a supply of food and went back to town. No elephant passed through the night, but in the morning I shot one out of a large herd. As soon as the others had gone, I ran quickly to my master, who, praising me highly, came back to the forest and helped to bury the huge creatures. This was done to obtain the tusks when the body and the flesh of the animal had rotted. Every day for 2 whole months, I shot an elephant. One morning, while I was waiting for elephants, instead of passing by, they came toward me and looked at me steadily for a few moments. I trembled with fear, for the creatures were many in number and seemed bent on taking my life in revenge for the death of their dear friends. One great animal, at last, uprooted the tree on which I was, lifted me from the ground where I had fallen, placed me on his back, and closely followed by the others, carried me to a field some distance away. This place was covered with bones and teeth of the dead elephants. Having laid me on the ground, they all went away, leaving me lost in wonder at their wisdom. It seemed as if they knew it was only their teeth I wanted, and they had brought me to their burying place, so that I could get all I wanted without killing any more of their number. Here was a great treasure. I went quickly to tell my master of my good and lucky fortune. My master, wondering why I was away for so long, had meanwhile gone to the tree and found it uprooted from the ground. So he was overjoyed to see me, having feared the creatures had killed me in their anger. Next day, we rode to the spot on an elephant whom we loaded with as many tusks as it could carry. On getting back home, my master said that as he had become a rich man through me, I should be a slave no more. I will not only set you free, I will give you enough money to live on for the rest of your life, he said. I thanked the merchant for his kindness, but pleaded him to leave me to return to my country as a free man. This he was quite willing to do, saying that as soon as the wind was fair, he would send me home in one of the ships that would come to carry away the ivory. While waiting for the ships, I made several journeys to the hill with the friendly merchant, bringing home so many tusks that the storehouses were soon full of ivory. The merchant chose the ship in which I was to sail, filled it with ivory, and half of which he said was mine. Besides the splendid present, he gave me a number of things found or made only in that island, and enough food to last the whole voyage, and also paid the cost of my journey. The voyage was a good one. I bought some rare gifts for my family, and I set out for Baghdad with a party of merchants. I went straight to the Caliph in order to let him know that his command has been properly carried out. I had been out so long away that he feared some danger had befallen me, so I made myself bold enough to tell him of my adventures. The story of the elephants filled him with wonder indeed. Had he not known me to be a truthful man, he would not have believed it. As it was, he gave orders that this story, as well as all the others I had told, should be written in letters of gold and kept in a safe place in his palace for all time. Everybody, including my family and all my friends, welcomed my return with great joy. Since that last voyage, I have lived a quiet life, doing much good. Although he had no more stories to tell, Sinbad begged the poor porter to come to dine with him every day. "You need not to do any more rough work," said he, wishing him good night, and putting into his hand another purse full of gold sequins, "for Sinbad the sailor will be your friend for the rest of your life." "That was a good story," said the Sultan, "but the night is only half over. I know you have another one to tell." Of course Scheherazade had. I will tell the next story in the next audio. For now, goodbye.